Good morning. Welcome to this service of the Paint Branch Unitarian Universalist Church. We are glad you're here. The host will mute everyone, and when it's your turn to speak, be sure to unmute yourself. Now, David Chapman is going to bring us our opening music, Wings of Forgiveness by India Airy.
Good morning, everybody. This is Mason, your piano. Remember me? Well, David just wanted me to tell you that he's going to play a prelude before the prelude. He's going to attach them together so you don't have to clap in between tunes, and of course, unless you want to. It's a tune he did not want to play 4 years ago, but is proud to play today. You might recognize it.
Thank you, David. Good morning. Welcome to Paint Branch Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Clark Ritz. My pronouns are he and him. I'm one of a team of worship associates that works with the minister and church staff and others in bringing you the worship services, even when it's best that we don't meet in person. We strive to be a welcoming community. We are from all over. Our families have come from different countries. Among us, we have a range of sexualities. We have a range of shapes and sizes and appearances and identities. We have different physical abilities from one another. And we've been waiting for you to join us here. And speaking of here, we acknowledge, even though we're not in our physical church, that the land where our church's building stands is the ancestral home of the Piscataway people, who have a history in the region stretching from the Potomac River towards the Chesapeake Bay, going back thousands of years. Whatever brought you online this morning, we're so glad that you decided to share the morning with us. Before we move into worship, remember our Zoom skills. As Russ said, look around the edge of your screen and make sure you find your mute button, probably a microphone icon. Make sure you're muted throughout the service. Find the bubble for your chat screen. I see many of you already have, maybe in a different place depending on your device. You can probably also switch from speaker to gallery view, which can let you see more than one person at a time, although you'll probably want speaker view for the service. And just a reminder that we are recording on Facebook Live and Zoom. So right now in chat, if you haven't already, say how many people are attending via your connection. One, if it's just you. That way we can get a sense of how many people are attending the service. If you're visiting us for the first or second time, I invite you to post who you are in chat if you feel comfortable doing so. That way we can greet you better. After the service today, we will have coffee hour breakout rooms. At the end of the service, you will receive a pop-up window to join a breakout room at random with a few other folks for small conversations. You can accept that, or if you decline, you will stay in the main room and you'll have an opportunity to speak with the board. There'll be a meeting today after the service to share your thoughts on agenda items for the upcoming meeting of the Board of Trustees.
At the end of this week, in which we all hope our nation has turned a corner for the better, we need one another more than ever. We give thanks for the opportunity to gather once again, even in this online way, to share our mutual support. Come, let us worship together. We begin by singing together, "Break Not the Circle."
And now I invite Bennett Ritz to light our chalice this morning. Please stay muted in Zoom, but do speak the words for our chalice lighting along with Bennett.
We light this chalice to celebrate Unitarian Universalism. This is the church of the open mind, the helping hands, the loving heart, and the radiant spirit.
Encendamos este cáliz para celebrar el unitarismo, universalismo. Esta es la iglesia de la mente abierta, de las manos amigas,
del amor, del corazón y del espíritu radiante.
Thank you, Bennett. And now please join us singing along at home, staying on mute as David plays hymn 1012, When I Am Frightened. Thank you, David. When I told my wife, Megan, that the topic of this service was forgiveness, she sort of snorted and choked back a laugh, signaling that this is an ideal service for me to attend, but not necessarily contribute to. Forgiveness is difficult for me in some circumstances. Now, I'm a very calm and easygoing person. I know I'm not right about everything. I think I'm pretty quick to apologize if I've done something wrong or failed in some way. I did ask Megan, and she said that was probably true. I didn't seem to have a problem with apologizing. And there are many, many things that I can forgive without a second thought. Personal insults? I'm okay with who I am, and I have almost no emotional reaction to insults. Not that I give folks much reason to insult me. If you cut me off in traffic, I might roll my eyes and shake my head if you're in a big fancy car, and I might think that you're awfully self-important, but I know you might just be late to pick up your kid, or on your way to an important doctor appointment, or stress about a big job interview. Go in peace. I hope you get where you're going safely. Load the dishwasher incorrectly? Well, there is a correct way to do it, but I know not everyone's the same, so I will simply unload and reload the dishes, mostly without comment. Just so long as you didn't make a serious mistake and put one of my good knives in there. I do remember a time about 9 years ago when someone put my paring knife in the dishwasher. But anyway, I do have trouble with forgiveness when people are wrong. So I'm an analyst by trade, training, and temperament. If you're wrong about something that I know about, I can tell you exactly how wrong you are. In exquisite detail, I can produce graphs to illustrate your wrongness. I can calculate to several decimal places the magnitude of your failure. I often feel compelled to do you this service. Not everyone seems to appreciate it. I think the words smug and condescending came up the other day when my family was trying to tell me why this isn't as helpful as I think it should be. But there are people out there who are wrong. There are people who are spreading false information about COVID-19. There are people spreading false information about vaccines. There are people spreading false information about last fall's election. There are people denying the measurable reality of racism. Some of them are people I grew up with, people I know. Their actions contribute to terrible consequences, and the last thing I want to do is forgive. I want to fix. I know that their motives may be good even, but they're wrong, and I need to show them that they're wrong. But I've heard that yelling at people just makes them dig in deeper. I've lost sleep being angry at people, even though I can't see how me being now both tired and angry the next day does much to change their minds. I can't even contemplate what forgiveness means here. So, see why Megan laughed when I said I was signed up for the service on forgiveness. I'll just have to close by saying that I plan to pay close attention to Russ's sermon today. And now we turn to joys and sorrows.
Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning. My name is Lynn Lewison, and I'm a pastoral care associate here at Paint Branch, along with Kathy Bartolomeo and Jim Flaherty. As we gather in community, we carry life's hurts and its great joys. And we think it is still helpful to provide an opportunity for attendees to share these joys and sorrows. So during this online service, I invite you to share your joys and sorrows in the chat, and I will lead a meditation after the intonation. And now, David Chapman will play Forgiveness and Love by Miley Cyrus. Thank you, David. Now let us take a few minutes to acknowledge all that has been shared, as well as those joys and sorrows that remain unshared and yet are on our minds. In this quiet time, may our hearts open to hope and healing. May our minds open to hope and possibility. May we hold, excuse me, may we hold all these and one another in love and kindness, so that this congregation may be a source of strength and comfort, courage and hope in the days and weeks ahead.
Forgive and forgiveness are words which we often toss around without much thought or precision. I could never forgive her for saying that, or, oh, I've forgiven him a long time ago for what he did, or, let's just forgive and forget. Please forgive me for being 10 minutes late. We're asking that this debt of $100 be forgiven. President Biden is talking about forgiving student loans. Or maybe you've heard this one. Forgiveness is easier to obtain than permission. While all the faith traditions of the world call their followers to engage in forgiveness, it's really modern psychology which has taught us the most about it. Robert Enright, who has done much scholarly work and clinical work with forgiveness at the University of Wisconsin, offers this as one definition of forgiveness. Forgiveness is a willingness to abandon one's right to resentment, negative judgment, and indifferent behavior toward one who has unjustly injured us, while fostering the undeserved qualities of compassion, generosity, and even love toward that person. Wow. There are a lot of key words in that definition. One is the word right. When we have been deeply wronged by another person, we have a right to harbor resentment, to imagine terrible punishments and retribution for that person, to act negatively toward him or ignore her. The problem is, what happens to us when we exercise that right? At first, of course, we enjoy it. It feels good. In his poem, Tam O'Shanter, Robert Burns tells of the wayfaring Tam making his way home after a night of drinking. His angry wife is waiting for him. The poem says, gathering her brows like gathering storm, nursing her wrath to keep it warm. How many of us have done this? It feels good to be angry at someone who has done us wrong, at least at first. So we nurse our wrath to keep it warm, so we can be ready to let the person have it when we meet him. The problem with this practice is that it is all-consuming. We can't think of anything else. Our anger takes over and completely dominates us. Have you seen this happen? Has it happened to you? One of the teachings of recent psychology is that forgiveness is more for the forgiver than it is for the one forgiven, more for the victim than for the offender. Through forgiveness, the victim lays down the terrible burden of revenge and retribution that she has been carrying around. The victim has a right to anger and thoughts of retribution, but managing them becomes such a burden, so much work, so all-consuming, that it becomes a need of the victim, the person who has been wronged, to give up those rights. That is the act of forgiveness. It is an intentional relinquishing of those rights, undertaken so the person wronged can be relieved of that burden and get on with life. Now, it's important to make some distinctions about what forgiveness is and what it is not. Forgiveness does not mean saying that the wrong act committed against us was okay. It was not okay. If it were okay, it wouldn't need to be forgiven. We choose to forgive even though we have been wronged. Forgiveness does not mean we have to forget. Forgetting simply means letting go of the past without trying to understand it. Forgiving involves remembering in new, creative, and transformative ways. Forgiving does not necessarily involve reconciling, although it might. Forgiveness itself is an internal, individual, spiritual, and psychological process. Reconciliation is a process between two or more people who seek to restore a relationship. Forgiveness might lead to reconciliation, but not necessarily. Let's imagine a case where these two, forgiveness and reconciliation, might be separate. Imagine, let's say, a case of domestic violence in which a woman has been physically injured, maybe repeatedly, by a man. For her own psychological and spiritual health, she needs to forgive. She needs to stop nursing her wrath to keep it warm. She needs to put down the burden of revenge and retribution which is dominating her life. So she makes a conscious, intentional decision to forgive. That does not mean it is called for, or even wise, or even safe for her to return and live under the same roof with the man who has injured her. He has some work to do too, before that is called for, and maybe it never will be. Forgiveness is an interpersonal act between two people. It isn't absolutely necessary that both of them be aware of their involvement. The offender may be recalcitrant and unwilling to be forgiven. The offender may have a different view of what happened and not think he needs to be forgiven. Maybe the offender is already dead. Does this mean we can never lay down the burden of suffering we're carrying? To take such a position is to give unnecessary and undeserved power to the person who offended us. We can do the work of forgiveness even if the one who wronged us does not take part, never acknowledges the need to be forgiven, and perhaps never even knows of our intentional act of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not a simple act. We can't, without examination and work, simply say, "I forgive you," and have it over with. There is psychological and spiritual work to be done to accomplish forgiveness. It can be hard work, sometimes painful work. But the bargain is to be relieved of the burden of resentment we are harboring. So if you want to reduce it to a simple economy, when the burden of resentment becomes harder and more painful than the work of forgiveness, it simply makes good sense to forgive. Now, what is the work of forgiveness? Modern psychology teaches us that there is a clear structure and specific steps we take in the process of forgiveness. If you want to break it down into units, it has 4 identifiable steps. First, we must name the injury that has been done to us, review it and recall its details, know and be fully aware of what has happened to us. This can be painful work. If the wrong was not too deep, perhaps the pain of naming and reviewing it will not be too great. If the wrong, on the other hand, was darker than death or night, to use a phrase from Shelley's poem, the pain might be overwhelming. Imagine the pain of naming and recalling to a victim of childhood sexual abuse. It may be so great that this work is best done with a counselor. But the burden of resentment is also great, and this is what we want to be rid of. Naming and reviewing is the first step in the structure of forgiveness. Next comes an intentional decision to forgive. This means an intention to give up the feelings of resentment and imagining retribution, even though you have a right to them. The bargain is that those feelings have become such a burden that you are willing to give them up, to be relieved of that burden. There may also be deeper reasons for your decision to forgive, reasons such as the teaching of various religious traditions that the act of forgiveness is a sacred act or a godlike act. Third comes the hard work. We must struggle to achieve empathy with the one who wronged us. What could have made him do such a thing? What was there in her background that brought her to that place? Can we understand that person as being fully human, which means being imperfect, just as each of us is imperfect? Can we imagine ourselves in the place of the offender, or maybe even doing the thing that he did to us? This can be hard work, because sometimes we can imagine doing something similar if we are honest with ourselves. If we can understand and empathize with this person and accept her or him as fully human, can we move toward having some positive feelings for that person, compassion, maybe even love? This, too, can be very hard work. But if we can do that hard work, we can arrive at the fourth step, the step which contains a reward even greater than being relieved of the burden of resentment, of nursing our wrath to keep it warm. That final step is a new understanding of the offense, a reframing of the event which gives it new meaning, which may be healing and even transformative for us. That is the real gift of forgiveness, and we can give it to ourselves. Forgiveness is an important thing for the world to be thinking about in light of present events. The list of offenses and people to be forgiven is so long. Can we forgive the mob of domestic terrorists who stormed and invaded the US Capitol on January 6? Can the adult man forgive the priest who abused him when he was an altar boy? It seems shocking to think of forgiving acts like these and the people who commit them. But what choice is there? Retribution only leads to more retribution from the other side in an escalating train of madness. God knows we have seen that in recent years. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Forgiveness does not necessarily mean reconciling, where we let down our guard and leave ourselves open to further offense and injury. After we and others have fully named and reviewed what has been done to us, could we come to a rational, intentional decision to try to forgive? Again, not to forget or leave ourselves open to further injury, but to give up our right to feelings of hatred and revenge and retribution. The next step would be striving to understand and even empathize with the offender. What is it in their background that led them to the acts they committed? It isn't enough to stop by saying, as a friend said to me recently while we were talking about the Capitol invasion, well, they're just crazy. It seems to me we are under a duty to try to understand what could make one group of human beings act toward our nation in the way that these people did. And if we understood more fully, could we ever develop feelings of empathy for those who have committed such heinous wrongs? Could we understand them as fully human, just as we are, and imperfect, just as we are? If we could do all this, could we be transformed as a nation of people in the way we interact with the world? Could others? This would be the real gift of forgiveness. Perhaps it is too much to hope that we could achieve such a thing, but on a smaller and more personal scale, each one of us can strive toward and receive the gift of forgiveness. Over the coming days, I invite you to consider whether you are carrying the burden of resentment against someone, and whether that burden is at times heavier than you want to bear. Can you do the hard work of fully remembering what was done to you, balancing it with the load of simmering resentment you are carrying, and make a conscious, intentional decision to forgive? Then can you do the hard work of empathizing, striving to understand what brought that person to the place in which he or she could have hurt you so? What brought those terrorists to invade the Capitol as they did? If you can work your way through this structure of forgiveness, you may find that you receive the gift of forgiveness, Not only relief from the burden of resentment, but transformation in the way you understand yourself and your life and all events. May it be so for each one of us. Amen.
Thank you, Russ. Lots of work to do. Speaking of work to do, the mission of this church carries on in these uncertain times, and it's more important than ever. We're so grateful to have the financial support of members and friends. Please give as generously as you are able. Chuck's posted the information for giving to PBUUC in the chat window. It can also be found in the online order service. And now David will play our offertory, a classical piece of music from the 16th century Italian composer Giulio Caccini, entitled Amarilli.
Now may the blessing of truth be upon us, the power of love direct us and sustain us, and may the peace of this community preserve our going out and our coming in from this time forth until we meet again. Let us close by singing together, Fuente de Amor, Spirit of Life.
I'll invite Bennett back up. All right, we have extinguished our chalice. Remember that we will have coffee hour breakout rooms. You'll receive a pop-up invitation. If you decline that, then you will stay in this main room and there will be an opportunity to share your thoughts on agenda items for the upcoming board meeting.